The majority of fighters train very hard, but when I think of someone who literally gives it his all even before he steps in the ring, I can't help but think of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Throughout his whole career, Hagler felt he had something to prove against the boxing world, against those that never gave him a chance or an opportunity. By the time it came to fight night though, the monster inside Hagler would be released and he would give it his absolute all to win, no matter the cost. But just like with any great champion, it was Hagler's rigorous training and brute mentality that made him one of the greatest middleweights we've ever seen. So on that note, let's get right into it. But first up, it's important to go back to Hagler's younger years and how he faced the trauma that helped push him towards greatness. When a quiet teen in Newark arrived in Brockton, Massachusetts, he was someone who grew up around poverty, chaos, riots in his hometown. Hagler at first was very timid around his new neighbourhood, particularly trusting those who are white, as he wasn't used to being around a mixed society in his upbringing in Newark. Hagler would find a boxing gym in Brockton and would go there each day. It just so happened to be the Petronelli brothers gym, owned by Goody and Pat. They had been amateurs themselves, and had also been close friends to Brockton's finest, the undefeated heavyweight world champion Rocky Marciano, who interestingly was meant to partner up with them in the gym before his sudden death. Goody was the recognised trainer of the two brothers, and noticed a young Hagler diligently observing the training and the fighter's every move from the sidelines. After a while, Goody noticed the young Hagler taking in his training. It wasn't until Goody eventually took his chance to convince him to get involved.
The fighters I was generally doing, he just sat there, came in the next day, he sat down, he was watching. So I was in the ring one day and I just looked over at him, I said, "Hey kid, you want to learn how to fight?"
And all I needed was a good teacher and somebody to show me what to do with these, you know.
And he did his homework well, he really did. What I taught him in there, he'd come back in again. It seemed like he picked up a lot quicker than the other kids.
His mind is made up what he wants to be. He'd get in the back room and he'd sign little autographs from the future middleweight champion of the world. And he'd sign it as a kid.
From here, Hagler's passion for boxing would begin, as he became a regular face at the gym, turning up each day, all with the intention of learning as much as possible about the sweet science. As a young Hagler committed himself, his trust for the Petronellis began to grow, with Goody saying the following: "After a while, I told Marvin how pleased I was in his development. His eyes lit up with delight. He confessed that when he went home, he continued to practice his moves over and over again in a big mirror." It just shows you how a few words of encouragement can push someone to work harder and go for their dreams. The trust grew further with the Petronellis as they set him out in his amateur career, while he was also given a labouring job with the brothers, which included digging ditches, mixing cement, cutting trees, and other hard labouring jobs. This all no doubt helped build up his incredible strength, power, stamina, resilience from a young age. I also find any working class man that works in the trade and boxes are always going to be tough men. In this crucial amateur period is where Hagler would build up his impressive skill set, developing his switch hitting and adopting the southpaw stance, despite him naturally being orthodox, before finally entering the pro game. Now, before going into the specific areas of the things Hagler worked on, I wanted to share his actual training routine under the Petronellis. Now, I've gotten information from various archive articles, fight documentaries, and his biography, and this is pretty much a brief outline of a typical training camp day in Provincetown. It's also to remember that Hagler was a full-time professional on camp doing these routines, so you won't be able to implement it exactly into your own, but you can definitely maybe take some ideas. Various sources also gave different times in terms of when he would do specific things, but for the purpose of this video I've just given one example of a daily training routine. At 7 AM he would get up and do his 6-mile run and would go up steep hills and even run backwards. He would then come back and have breakfast, which included cereal, fruit, a mix of cornflakes and a glass of grapefruit juice. After this, Hagler would then isolate himself in his room and would watch tape, read and sleep before his main boxing session in the afternoon. This would usually be around for 2 hours and it would involve boxing training and strength conditioning, which I'll touch on later. And then after this he would have his dinner, watch film and sleep, and his dinner would mainly include things like fish. and chicken. Now when you actually just look at this typical training day, it's nothing that would actually blow your mind. It was very simple and old school in nature. That just shows you sometimes you don't need to overcomplicate your training, but you do however need to show complete dedication, as Hagler did, as I'll get into. But on that note, let's get into the specific details of his training. Cardio. So as I just mentioned, Hagler would go on his morning run, usually around for 6 miles. He would famously go out wearing combat boots, claiming only softies would wear running shoes for their road work, which no doubt added to his mental toughness. He said after his career about that topic, "It's totally different now. Fighters are always trying to find the easy way of doing things, but there's no easy way. It's got to be from the old school, the hard way." Not only that, for many Hagler's training camps, he would run in the cold winter months at Cape Cod, Provincetown, next to the Atlantic Ocean, where he'd run up and down desolate bike trails and quite often on the beaches next to the sea. While it was also said he would at least run 1 mile going backwards too. Interestingly, in studies, it has been said that reverse running can actually make your legs stronger, as it's activating muscles you don't work on. Another cardio-based workout, like all boxers do, was the jump rope, which he would usually do for 3-minute rounds and mainly as a warm-up or warm-down during his afternoon session. Boxing training. Now in terms of boxing training itself, Hagler would keep it very simple and his whole evening workout acted as a big circuit, but the main rule from the Petronellis was to enact the timing in a boxing fight. This of course is 3 minutes of work, 1 minute rest for everything. Obviously this would help Hagler be able to mimic the intensity of the fight he was preparing for, but for most of each activity it would be around 3 to 5 rounds of training. This included all your typical boxing training you'd expect, including shadow boxing, and from watching him you can tell he's visualizing as if he has an opponent in front of him, and he would practice things like his combinations, switching stances, or even working on the back foot, while also making sure he would shadow box in front of a mirror to keep himself in check. He would also use the heavy bag too, but there's very little footage or photography of him using this, but he would do 3 to 5 rounds on the bag. There's also the speed bag, which is another key part of his training and would mainly help with his shoulder conditioning, timing and rhythm, while the Brockton fighter would also work with Goody Petronelli on the pads, working on various combination with his trusted trainer. Once again, there isn't too much footage. This no doubt helped Hagler to work on specific combinations and tactics for upcoming fights. Finally, it was sparring for Hagler, which of course was the key component in his development and preparation for any fight. And as you would expect from the Marvelous One, he would train as you fight and fight as you train. Goody would also make sure to bring in sparring partners for Hagler that would be similar to the opponent he would be facing. For example, in his preparation for Tommy Hearns, they brought in tall, rangy fighters like the Hitman, including Bobby Watts and Jerry Hawley. Hagler was also known to bust up a lot of sparring partners due to the intensity he trained at, quite often sending a lot home on the first day. Goody would also make it more challenging by making him wear extra heavy gloves and sometimes make him do longer rounds, no doubt to give his partners a chance. Strength and conditioning. Now for the strength and conditioning, it was all part of his boxing training circuit in the evenings. And from my research, Goody didn't particularly like or believe in weight training, believing it would compromise speed and flexibility. He much preferred bodyweight exercises, as he saw it as a much better way to build up the strength and endurance. This included things like pull-ups, push-ups, leg lifts and crunches, but a big focus was 3 rounds of different variations of sit-ups to really strengthen the midsection, which was obviously crucial to enhance the power of Hagler's punch and withstand punches himself. Training in isolation. Now another big part I want to talk about was that the fact Hagler felt he had to isolate himself in training camp, quite often in the middle of winter at the end of Cape Cod in Provincetown, which is pretty much the end of the road. But he obviously was inspired by fellow past greats who would do similar training camps to himself. He said, "You're supposed to seclude yourself. All the great champions did the same. Rocky Marciano, Muhammad Ali up on his mountain at Deer Lake, they put themselves in jail. I put myself in jail." It was quite often he said he wouldn't really socialise because he was so focused on the task at hand, and would rather isolate himself in his room watching tape of himself or studying upcoming opponents. He could be seen frequently sitting alone on the balcony staring out at the Cape water for long periods of time, no doubt visualising what he wanted to do to his opponent come fight night. He would even tell his family before going up there not to contact him for the full 6-week camp. It's interesting because obviously you see a lot of fighters, even nowadays, take themselves away from their comfortable setting, obviously to get away from home and the distractions. But a lot of these fighters go to warmer climates instead, or cities just to get away from an entourage that can't distract them. But Hagler, on the other hand, was different. He saw Provincetown as a place that forced him to train and challenge him mentally. He even said the famous quote, "It's tough to get out of bed to do road work at 5 AM when you're sleeping in silk pyjamas." But one thing you need to take note about Hagler is that he knew it was tough. Not many were willing to do that type of training camp over the years, as he knew it gave him an advantage over his opponents that trained in majestic locations. He knew when it got tough, his opponent would eventually go soft. Being in Provincetown as well in the winter probably acted more as a mental test than a physical one for the Marvelous One. Hagler's psychology. Now, from everything I've gone over, you can probably tell how dedicated and seriously Hagler took his boxing and his preparation. But a big part of his determination, I believe, was his alter ego, which he often referred to as the monster inside him. In Hagler's early amateur days as a young man, he wanted to build up a ring persona like Muhammad Ali at first, but he would eventually get the name Marvelous after a local reporter commented on his exciting style. But as much as Hagler was a gentleman and had a marvellous style of fighting, for him it was more about unleashing the monster he kept deep inside him. In 1981, he famously said the following: "There's a monster that comes out of me in the ring. I think it goes back to the days when I had nothing. It's hunger. I think that's what the monster is, and it's still there." Brooke Evans, who owned a hotel Hagler stayed during his time in Provincetown, went on a run with Hagler one morning, struggling to obviously keep up with him. However, as Hagler was up ahead, all he could hear was Marvin grunting to himself, "I'm going to kill him. They aren't going to stop me. I'll kill them all." It was in these moments Hagler would feed the monster inside him, to store up the anger so he could take it out on his opponents. It was almost as if he was going to war. I think as well he felt so much injustice from his lack of respect that he didn't get compared to the other 3 kings, who were receiving much bigger paydays than him. He couldn't understand how he wasn't earning as much. But I also feel this would feed towards the monster to take out on his other opponents. It's no wonder when you consider he had a 78% KO record by the end of his career. Personally, I do believe having an alter ego can help increase performance and focus. And we have seen this in the likes of other sports with Kobe Bryant and his Mamba mentality, which took him to the peak of basketball. Some people need something to fuel their performance, and I believe Hagler was one of them by using that alter ego of the monster to help that killer instinct come out in the ring, but also so he could handle the tough environment he put himself in during his isolated camps, so he could set fire to that monster even more. The Petronelli brothers. The last point I want to touch on was the Petronelli brothers, who obviously had a big impact in training and guiding Hagler throughout his career. When Hagler first encountered them, he had no trust in them at all, but slowly but surely they gained his trust and built him up into one of the greatest middleweights we've ever seen. Goody once referred to the trio saying, "Nothing is stronger than a triangle," while Pat said, "We came up the hard way. Anything we got, we worked for. That's why there's a bond between us and the champ. We were never given anything on a silver platter. It was the same with Marvin. Nobody gave him a single break." We often see fighters jump around trainers a lot, and I agree sometimes it is required if you wish to get better or learn something new, but there are certain circumstances, and I believe there are 2 words that come to mind when I think of the Petronellis and Hagler: trust and loyalty. Hagler considered moving on a few times in his career, but his gut instinct always told him to stay with them. And you have to give them credit in terms of the training and setting they provided for Marvelous Marvin Hagler to make him into the monster he was at times. Final thoughts. From doing all my research, reading books, watching documentaries and countless of articles, There's no denying to me that Hagler is one of the hardest working fighters there's ever been. His training regimen was often referred to as Spartan-like, and I have to agree, Hagler never had it the easy way, but he also made sure to put himself in an environment which most boxers or men would never dare to consider. He wanted to fuel that alter ego of the monster in his training camps, all with the aim to destruct by the time it came to fight night. For me, Hagler leaves a very good example of working your hardest and then even harder. He taught us not to take the easy route, but dive into the abyss where no one else will go, as only then you will find out if you can truly be marvelous. And that wraps up this training breakdown, guys. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of Hagler's training. I'd love to know. Do you think many fighters could train the way he did in Provincetown? I don't think so. If you want more like this, make sure to check out my Marvin Hagler boxing style analysis. This has been Jamie from Boxing Life. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.